Hello all, and welcome to the December Patch Tuesday webcast. We will begin in just a few short moments, but before we do, I'd like to remind all attendees they are currently in listen-only mode. But feel free to ask any questions of our panelists at any time, and we will answer them during the live Q&A session at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to the one and only Rob Brown.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Patch Tuesday for December. It's the last one of the year. Once again, we're all wearing our favorite Patch Tuesday t-shirts. It's become quite a regular thing. We really appreciate everyone taking a moment, the next hour of your day to spend with us learning about Patch Tuesday, but we also have some great content on Linux and Mac OS, and of course third parties. And as usual, I have two specialists from my team to help me today. So John, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, thank you, Rob. Hey everyone, my name is John Cassell, Senior Solutions Architect at Syxsense. I am based in sunny, actually not so sunny, Southern California. I've been working in IT for many years, specializing in desktop, server operations, and at Syxsense, I work in pre-sales, customer onboarding, and customer training.
That's great, thank you, John. And Pete, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem at all, Rob, thanks. Hi everyone, my name's Pete, and I've worked for Syxsense as a pre-sales consultant for 5 years. Prior to my current role, I worked for an oil company where I managed a tool set that at the time was called Landesk. The tool was used to manage around 4,500 devices. It was used for general asset management, software deployment, and of course, patch deployment. In my current role, amongst other things, I demo the Syxsense products to potential customers, and I also train customers on all aspects of the product.
That's brilliant, thank you, Pete. Once again, I'm Rob Brown. I'm the head of services here in the UK. Been with the company for 15 years, running the managed services division, one of those being patch management. And we've deployed over 100 million patches really over the last 15 years. So welcome everybody. I've got lots of brilliant feedback from the webinar. We do encourage everyone watching, and we get a huge amount of views. We really appreciate everyone for commenting on the Facebook, sending us emails. Really does help us improve the value of what we're adding to the webcast. But I'd like to answer a few questions that were sent, and I thought these are brilliant questions actually. To specifically answer a few that we didn't get a chance to answer on the last webcast. And we will always respond privately to everyone that asks a question, but I thought these were really good that I want to just address them here today. So one of the questions was, why are weaponized patches not recorded as public aware? So they're weaponized, why are they not public? I actually just want to address the question and I'll answer that. There isn't such a thing as a weaponized patch. It's the weaponization occurs for the particular piece of code or the bug in the operating system or in the application. The patch actually fixes that. And even though you've got a weaponized vulnerability affecting Internet Explorer, they don't always announce what particular part of the code they've used to exploit it. So although the vulnerability is weaponized, the actual code that is used isn't public aware. And that's specifically what we're looking for when we announce that we have a public aware vulnerability. The next one was, why does Microsoft no longer publish the patch descriptions? We've seen this as well. We see a lot of vulnerabilities that are addressed by Microsoft. The descriptions are much shorter as they used to be. They used to have quite a lot of detail in them. But they do add these descriptions sometimes a day or two later. So if you actually go to the Microsoft page, whether using WSUS or whether you're going to Microsoft on the catalog, if you go to the patch a day later, they actually do put a description sometimes under the FAQ section. And that's where we are looking when we are adding our content into our own console. Next one is when are Linux vulnerabilities of the week being launched? We mentioned it last week that we were last month. Sorry, we were going to be releasing a vulnerability of the week for Linux because the cadence is much higher than Microsoft's. That's actually being launched this week. And a few other questions, which I think we'll actually answer those at the end. We'll get started. But please continue to send in your questions. They're really, really useful for us to help making sure we've got the right content added for this 1 hour per month webinar. So we do have some news. This one actually came out. I don't believe I know what the NVM stands for. I think it is some volatile memory. But there is an issue with Windows 10. Sorry, John, is
NVMe is a PCI Express-based solid-state technology, typically.
Okay.
So rather than using SATA, it's mounted directly to the motherboard. It's
right. Excellent. It's the first thing I saw. I thought, what does NVM know? I should have really done my research before I put this into the news page. So thank you, John. That's brilliant.
We even learn things in our own webinar.
So. Oh, we do. So Windows 10, there was a blue screen of death that was caused by one of these solid state drives for Windows 10 2004 and 2009, also known as 20H2. Now, what Microsoft is saying is that you should perform additional testing and, if necessary, delay the deployment of those 2 feature updates to any devices that have the solid state drives until you've finished your testing. And we would recommend that testing is performed on all types of device, including any additional devices where you have external USB devices attached. Google Chrome was released. I know John probably has a list of the fixes, but they were 8 major fixes fixed with Google Chrome. They also announced end of last month that they were going to pause the release of preview updates for December to ease the holiday burden, potentially in the run-up to Christmas and New Year. They don't want to have too many patches for the IT manager to deploy, so they said they were going to release no preview updates, but we actually think they have released one. So they did release one at the beginning of December, but you'll be happy to see that there's a significant drop in the number of patches that Microsoft have released to fix vulnerabilities this month. Windows feature update 1903 was retired for the standard release. That was retired yesterday. So if you are using 1903 and you're not on the long-term service branch, you really need to consider upgrading to the latest feature update. It's so important that patches are now based on those feature updates. So if your feature update is now retired, patches are not going to stick to your devices. So you must make sure you keep the feature update within the 18-month time frame. Also, Big Sur was released. That was interesting that they released it on the 12th of November, and on the 17th, just 5 days later, they released 11.1, the beta. We have some information on that as well. And then finally, Flash Player 32 was released. It's the last one of the year. Obviously, Flash Player is being retired at the end of this year, so it's strange that you only have another 21 days to use it before it's no longer supported, and that will become obsolete. John, you've done some brilliant research on your third parties this month. Would you like to take us through the board?
Absolutely, thank you, Rob. A number of things to go over for this month. I always want to mention this first, though, of course, third-party patches are just as important as operating system updates to remedy the potential vulnerabilities. Since last month, additional updates have been released to resolve some vulnerabilities, so we'll go over each one of these one by one. First, Adobe has issued patches for flaws tied to 1 important rated and 3 critical severity CVEs as part of its regularly scheduled December security updates. This is fewer than last month's, which patched vulnerabilities tied to 11 CVEs. Fortunately, Adobe stated that they're not aware of any of the exploits in the wild for any of these issues addressed in these updates. This month included a critical cross-site scripting vulnerability in Experience Manager, popular content management solution, and if exploited, it could allow a bad actor to execute arbitrary JavaScript on the victim's browser. An important severity flaw also exists in Experience Manager, which stems from blind server-side request forgery and can result in sensitive data disclosure, according to Adobe. They also addressed a critical vulnerability in its Lightroom Classic for Windows and Mac OS, which, if exploited, could enable arbitrary code execution in the context of the current user. And Adobe also urged Lightroom Classic users on Windows and Mac to update to version 10.1. The final critical vulnerability was patched in Adobe Prelude, Adobe's ingest and logging tool. This is an uncontrolled search path vulnerability that affects Prelude version 9.0.1 and earlier for Windows. I didn't see anything listed for Mac, so it must be just for Windows. If exploited, that flaw could enable arbitrary code execution as well. Google Chrome has been updated a few times since last month. It's been a very interesting past few months with Chrome and any Chromium-based browsers, a number of critical vulnerabilities. Google also has a bounty program, so this could also lead to it. I'll cover in just a moment, but a lot of external researchers have found a number of vulnerabilities, not Google themselves. They've had a few previous versions throughout November and the latest version in early December, resolving multiple critical and high severity vulnerabilities. These releases apply to multiple operating systems such as Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, and iOS. The versions that I'll majorly mention today are going to be for the desktop versions today, though, but it has been updated quite regularly for all platforms. The desktop version from November 11th resolved only a couple high severity vulnerabilities. That was just after our last Patch Tuesday call. But the November 17th desktop version resolved a total of 33 security fixes, which was a lot compared to many of the others that I've mentioned in the past and been doing research for quite some time now. These range from, again, high to low severity, many of which, again, were discovered by external researchers, actually. 23 of the 33 were externally found. The latest desktop release from the last week did include a number of high and medium severity fixes as well. Fortunately, most Chrome installations will update themselves, but no matter which version you're on, given that multiple releases have occurred within the same month with many fixes, you should definitely migrate to the latest if you haven't already. Microsoft Edge, also Chromium-based, received multiple releases since last Patch Tuesday. The releases from mid last month included critical and high severity fixes for the same CVEs that I just mentioned, given it's pretty much the same engine. That were resolved in Chrome, as well as there was an Edge release from Monday as well. The vulnerabilities in both Chrome and Edge have been reported to be actively exploited, and this of course greatly increases the priority. If Google Chrome or the new Microsoft Edge are being used in your environment, be sure to update as soon as possible to alleviate any active and potential exploits. Mozilla Firefox and Thunderbird have also received a release in mid-November. These versions offer new features, as well as resolve industry-rated and vendor-rated high and moderate severity vulnerabilities. This is something I always appreciate from Mozilla. It is usually rare for a vendor to supply their own rating, but fortunately, they do have a trend of being transparent about their security fixes, probably because of their open source nature. These bugs do include a sanitizer exploit, a potential stack corruption exploit, cross-scripting and use after free flaws, and a flaw with out-of-memory handling. The newest version of Firefox, version 83, includes a faster engine as a result of their JavaScript engine SpiderMonkey, as well as HTTPS only mode, which I thought was pretty cool. I use Firefox myself, so I'm probably going to be using that from now on, and a number of other usability and touchscreen enhancements for Windows and Mac installations. Haven't discussed this one in the past, but it's actually been some time, so I'll explain why. Apache also released OpenOffice version 4.1.8, which is their latest release after not getting a new update since September of 2019. This release for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux devices includes new enhancements such as OpenOffice SDK leveraging Java 8 and updated dictionaries, as well as a number of other bug fixes, and biggest reason that I'm mentioning it here, resolving a high severity vulnerability where unrestricted actions leads to arbitrary code execution in crafted documents. Given that OpenOffice hasn't produced a new release in some time, I would recommend updating that if it applies to you. Additional products that have also seen updates since last Patch Tuesday include Dropbox, Flash Player 32, which, as Rob mentioned, is the last version. I would like to remind everyone again that it will be coming to an end shortly at the end of this month, as Adobe will no longer support after December 31st. and Adobe is continuing to encourage the use of open HTML5 standards in place of Flash. Most browsers have already made that shift, but if you happen to still be using it or you have a platform on it, be a little careful. Some additional third-party product updates also include iTunes, Opera, RingCentral, Skype, Snagit, WinRare, WinSCP, WebEx, and Zoom. Interesting month for Zoom. That one last, of course, gets alphabetical, but we have been seeing, of course, a lot of updates over the course of the last year, of course, the pandemic. But lately, not too many. So it's good to see that things have been kind of standardizing, locked down, not too many changes. Lastly, my monthly reminder to all administrators, though, always include the third-party patching in your patch management process. It's not just about the operating system updates. Any application can be considered a major vulnerability if not updated regularly. Something else to highlight as well, because this just occurred. I wanted to highlight an event that was disclosed just yesterday. Cybersecurity firm FireEye was hit with what their CEO described as a highly targeted cyber attack. The attacker targeted and was able to access certain red team assessment tools that the company uses to test its customer security. According to FireEye, the attacker was primarily hunting out data related to certain government customers. Their CEO posted that the hack used a novel combination of techniques not witnessed by them or their partners in the past. And I thought that was very interesting. The attack is, quote unquote, different from the tens of thousands of incidences they've responded to throughout the years. The attackers tailored their world-class capabilities specifically to target and attack FireEye. They are highly trained in operational security and executed with discipline and focus. They operated clandestinely using methods that counter security tools and forensic examination. FireEye said that they will continue to monitor any activity involving the red team tools and is currently investigating the attack in coordination with the FBI and other partners like Microsoft. I really wanted to highlight this one because in this event, of course, it was just disclosed yesterday, but it's also yet another event where security should be highly maintained throughout an organization. There's not enough info just yet on this particular hack, of course, to know how exactly it happened, what was exploited. But of course, one of the most common methods of attacking is to exploit known vulnerabilities. Be sure to patch and secure your devices inside or outside the network, especially now due to recent events outside the network as possible too, whenever possible to ensure you've reduced your potential attack vector. Thank you, Rob.
That is brilliant, John. I've really enjoyed that. That was excellent. And I am actually quite happy to see that there hasn't been another 0-day vulnerability for Zoom, because I know a lot of our audience is using Zoom to support users from home. So it's nice that they don't have any more urgent things to work on this month. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you, John. Really, thank you. Okay, first, an apology. I promised in the last webinar that we would do a piece on patch testing. And unfortunately, but to be honest, I've been a little bit poorly for about a week and a half, and I haven't been able to put that slide deck together. It's about 90%, but I'd rather it be absolutely perfect before I deliver it. It's a highly sophisticated topic. And so last week I asked if Pete would be able to extend the frequently asked questions that he has asked from a pre-sales perspective about what customers are asking their systems management tool, their patch management tool to do. And he was able to put the next 5 questions of his list together at the last minute. So Pete, thank you very much for that. You really helped me out. So I've got the questions here, and I'll let you ask them.
Okay, yeah, great, thanks. Okay, Rob, yeah, so as you mentioned, we get, well, I get asked these questions quite a lot during training and demo sessions, and we get, obviously, some of them we get sent in anyway, so I thought, you know, it's probably handy for everybody to hear at least my take on the answers for these. So the first question's up there. So basically, yeah, I feel that this can be a slightly tricky question to answer without knowing more information from the person asking the question, basically because there's many factors that can influence the final strategy that is implemented. These can include things like how much automation they want to include into a process, how much testing they want to carry out for each patch. Are there any compliancy certifications that they are trying to meet or must meet? That type of thing. Personally, and broadly speaking, if I was to build a patch deployment process for Microsoft patches, I'll stick with those to start with. I would build something that would evolve over time. Now, for example, let's say that your estate has not been patched for a long time. You've run patch scans. You can see that many devices require many patches. I would initially start by deploying patches, MS patches with a high CVSS score. So let's say 8.9 or higher. Then over a period of several weeks or even a couple of months, I would gradually reduce that score, bringing it down, thus allowing more and more patches to be added to what we call the baseline. Eventually, obviously, you would be aiming to have all MS patches deployed as and when required, regardless of their CVSS score. And in other words, they're all added to the baseline. Moving forward, so once you are at that level of patch deployment, I would then possibly change my strategy, and I would then maybe build some sort of test process in place, especially with new patches. So let's say patches that are younger than 15 days old, I would use a tool to find those patches and deploy them to a small test group of devices, and that's all that would happen with those patches. That would obviously then allow you some time to get feedback from the users of those devices, and obviously there could be test devices and even some end users. If one of those patches is then proves to cause an issue, you can take that out of any patch deployment strategy, put it into a patch prison or something like that. Let's say none of those patches do cause a problem, or you've caught the one that causes a problem. The remaining patches, once they become older than 15 days old, and this is just an arbitrary number, it could be 30 days, 10 days, whatever you want, those patches that would then roll over into another deployment strategy where they're then getting deployed to all devices. So that's quite a nice automatic way of putting a small delay into patch deployment, which is therefore building a bit of time where you're just deploying to a small group of devices. That would be sort of one of the ways that I would go around that. In addition to the above, I would also obviously, and I'm sure JC is keen to hear this, I would include a method of deploying third-party patches. Now that could be something fairly simple. It could be that you just look through your console for the third-party patches, pick and choose the ones that you absolutely need to deploy, or possibly all of them, but test them on some test devices. Once you've are sure that they don't cause any issues, and invariably they're updating applications and things like that, so make sure that application still works, you could add those third-party patches to a group or a container which is just getting deployed at the same time as your baseline of MS patches. So a little bit of a manual process there, but it would allow you to obviously pick and choose and test those patches. Of course, obviously, you could just deploy all patches to any device, and we do have customers that do that with no testing whatsoever. But that's a simple deployment strategy, I would say, to put it mildly. Okay, next question, please, Rob. Okay, so whilst some patch development tools may well deliver all of the patches down to a device, each patch has its own inbuilt detection logic, which means that if the patch is not needed on that device, it will refuse to install. Having said that, I mean, that obviously means you are deploying a payload to a device only for it not to install. So there is sort of a slight waste of bandwidth and creating traffic there unnecessarily. Our Syxsense product actually has two types of tasks with regards to patch management. We have a simple patch scan task, which will determine whether devices are vulnerable and therefore require patching. This information is obviously displayed in the console for individual devices, and it drives our reports, and within the patch management area, it drives the figures and columns that are in that. The second type of task that we have is an actual patch deployment task. Now that obviously deploys the patches, but it actually carries out three stages. It will actually scan the device for each patch we're trying to deploy at the time of deployment. If the device reports back that it doesn't need a patch, then the task simply moves on to the next patch and the next patch, etc., and obviously only deploying the actual payload when the device reports back that it actually requires the actual patch. And we run a final patch scan at the end of that, just to make sure that the vulnerabilities are actually plugged. Now, this actually allows that we can deploy many patches to many devices, and only the patches that are required on each device will actually get installed on each device. So there's quite an efficient method there. The scanning itself is very efficient. It's just a very small amount of data going back and forth from the devices to the console. The payload is obviously a bigger issue, and it's only worth deploying that when the device says, I absolutely require this and I need the install. Okay, next question, please, Rob. Okay, and I did sort of allude to this, that we do have customers that just push out patches that, a totally automatic process, and you can do that. Having said that, I feel that that's somewhat of a tidal wave approach of patch deployment, and it may well get all the vulnerabilities remediated in a very small or a short period of time, but there could be a level of disruption by doing things this way. This could include devices that randomly reboot because of the number of pending reboots. Equally, you may have end users complaining about the disruption because of slow speed of their devices, which has been caused by the high CPU and bandwidth requirements to this sort of tidal wave approach. We have also noticed that many patches will simply refuse to install if a pending reboot is set on the device. Let's say if you try and deploy 30 patches to a device and the 5th patch sets the reboot flag, then it's highly likely that the 25 remaining patches will just simply refuse to install. Now, Microsoft do this for very valid reasons. Is to protect the device, the integrity of the patch, and the operating system and things like that. It's perfectly reasonable that they've inbuilt that into many of their patches. Okay, next question, please, Rob. Okay, so superseded patches. Our product does actually include superseded patches for up to 1 year. After that, we do remove the patch because obviously at some point we need to cull out the really old patches. This is for both Microsoft and third-party patches. Now, in truth, there may be very little reason that you'd want to deploy a superseded Microsoft patch. But having said that, the fact that it's in our console means that you can actually select that patch and you can actually do an uninstall. And there may be a valid reason why you need to uninstall an old superseded patch. But with regards to third-party patches, I think the case there for including old patches is a little bit stronger. Let's say, for example, during testing with the latest Java runtime patch, it may cause a problem with an application that you're running. Java's renowned for being a bit tricky with regards to apps and things like that. In which case, having a superseded patch, the older version, and again, you could test that, and if that doesn't prove to cause a problem, you could deploy that. And it's better to be at least deploying an older patch rather than no patches at all. At least you're plugging many of the potential vulnerabilities there. Obviously, in the long term, whatever that application was that is not working with the latest Java patch, the solution there would be to try and update that app, talk to the vendor, seek their advice basically on why it doesn't work with that particular version of Java. No doubt they'll come back and say, well, we're going to release a new version and that's compatible, and that will be the way forward. Okay, next question, please, Rob. Okay, so yeah, I have mentioned reboots basically, and I do feel that this is somewhat of a catch-22 situation. The more aggressive you are in patch deployment, then the more likely the reboot flag will get set on a device, and then obviously no further patches will install on that device. My suggestion here would be really that running in parallel with your patch deployment process, you could build a process that targets the devices where a reboot flag is set. So we're only going to annoy the users, if annoy is the right word, when we absolutely have to, because we know for a fact their devices require a reboot. We could target those devices with a pure reboot task with some end user control. So with a message that pops up, giving them chances to snooze the reboot or even cancel the reboot if you want to go that far, although generally users will hit cancel if they see that. But by doing this, we're getting the devices rebooted and in a fit state to receive patches, although obviously we then deploy those patches, that might set the reboot flag, and round and round the whole process goes. But patch management is in essence that. It's never ending. There's always more patches coming into the, being released. Devices are going to require rebooting. Obviously, the patch deployment task itself could carry out a reboot, but by doing that and not checking for a reboot flag, there could be other reasons why a device is in a pending reboot state. And if you actually find those devices by actively looking for that flag, then regardless of why they need a reboot, we can get them rebooted maybe the day prior to your patch deployment day, that type of thing. Okay, that's all I have for the moment for those top 5 questions, but hopefully that's been interesting and given the viewers something to think about. So back to you, Rob.
That's brilliant, Pete. Thank you, and I really do appreciate you stepping in at the last minute. I actually have one more thing to talk about the reboot. Sometimes the reboot is essential. Sometimes parts of the operating system or the application is in use and can't actually be upgraded or installed whilst the main process is running. So the pending reboot is actually essential to finish the patch. So it needs to reboot so that what was being accessed at the time is released, and so that the patch can finish. So if you have lots of these pending reboots, you actually may not be fully protected against the vulnerabilities that those patches are actually trying to fix. So we always recommend reboots are really necessary from our perspective, and don't trust the end user to reboot, because they never will. They will always try to snooze or hibernate their machine so that their machine is ready to go first thing in the morning.
In my experience, end users tend to reboot at Christmas, and then they think they've done the reboot for the year, really. So it's not quite like that in the real.
Right there. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Pete.
So we're coming up to the annual reboot then, at least.
Yeah, later this month.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the Patch Tuesdays. There's more than one Patch Tuesday. If you didn't know, there's actually a few throughout the month. They actually separated these so that you have a more staged approach. So last week we had the non-security office update Patch Tuesday, and that was actually one of the largest non-security releases of the year. We had Skype for Business 2016. Actually, all of these are for Office for 2016. So we've got Skype for Business. We've got 4 patches for Office, 1 for Project, 1 for Publisher, 1 for Visio, and 1 for Word. Actually, the Office 2010 fell out of support last month. So luckily, there's no more updates needed for that platform. But if you are using Office 2010, that is now obsolete. So you do need to start planning to upgrade it, because any vulnerabilities that are found on that obsolete program won't be fixed. And yesterday, as I maybe said right at the beginning, we've had a hugely reduced Patch Tuesday, 58 in total, which actually is what we were used to getting prior to the pandemic. So we were getting anywhere between 50 and 70 on a usual month, and over the last 6 months it's gone up to as many as 120, 130 security fixes fixed in their release. So, but we have some interesting things to talk about still nonetheless. There was a .NET Framework fix for .NET Framework 5.0. So 5.0 was released last month, and they have issued a fix 5.0.1, which we think is actually an upgrade of the .NET. We also had an out of band earlier on, which I'm going to discuss very shortly, and 2 advisories this month that we have to consider. One of them is very important. Luckily for us, no 0 days so far since the last Patch Tuesday. So this is the out of band vulnerability. This actually was released over 2 separate days. So we actually thought when this came out that it wasn't going to be as bad until the next day when they released a new set of patches for all of the other operating systems, which pretty much means anything from Windows 8 and above needs this out of band patch. This is a Kerberos authentication issue. And what's interesting is for Windows 10, these are not added to Windows Update. So if you're using Windows 10 and you go to Windows Update, or if you're using Microsoft Update, if you go to there and you click it, it won't show that this patch is needed. You'll have to download the patch from the Microsoft site if you want to apply it. If you are connected into a network and you've got WSUS, okay, you can deploy the patch via WSUS, as well as other patching solutions are available to deploy that. But if you do have Windows 10, your users aren't going to be installing it if they are routinely running Windows Update on their machines each month. We have the advisory, which actually was re-released. This is for the servicing stack. Now, we talk a lot about servicing stack because they are so very important. Now, the servicing stack updates, they're classified as critical updates, but they're not actually resolving critical vulnerabilities. They are prerequisites for the patch. So they prepare the device so that the patches that Microsoft release can be installed. They sometimes include hardware updates as well, so that Dell and HP devices can take the patches successfully, so that there's an interaction between the hardware and the patch itself. Now, if you are on the very latest on the very latest feature update, sorry, or from 2004 onwards, providing you've got your September 2020 servicing stack installed, you won't need to worry about servicing stacks going forward. But if you are not there yet, or if you are installing devices in DMZs, in dark networks, you do need to make sure that the latest servicing stack is installed before any other Windows update. Otherwise, the machine could in fact become unstable and blue screen. So it's super important that you put that. If you can get to the latest feature update, going forward, all cumulative updates will automatically have inside them the servicing stack updates, so you won't have to worry about it, which is really good news. And lastly, this is the uber urgent one to bring up. It's a spoofing vulnerability in DNS. This is a server issue from anything including Windows 2008 server all the way to 2019. Microsoft is aware of a vulnerability involving DNS cache poisoning caused by IP fragmentation, and anyone that successfully exploits this vulnerability could spoof DNS packets. Now, there are no patches for this, but a countermeasure is available, and we are going to publish to our website today on how to modify the registry on your servers in order to countermeasure this vulnerability. But effectively, you need to go into the registry and increase the UDP buffer size to 1221, and that will get around this issue. Okay, so let's take a look at Patch Tuesday. Before we do, we're going to show you how we're going to prioritize it. Now, we use 6 factors when prioritizing each and every CVE that is released that has a KB assigned to it. We use the vendor severity, so that's the vendor issued severity. As John mentioned, some vendors actually are very transparent, others not so. We have with the vendor the CVSS score, which is an independent score. It is created independently by the vendor, but also then reanalyzed by an independent agency. And that score is anything from critical, high, medium, low to NA, just like the vendor severities. And if you compare the two, you have a better idea on the severity of the vulnerabilities being fixed. Then we have a weaponized status, as we mentioned right at the front. Weaponized means that the vulnerability is being actively exploited, and these can sometimes be a contributor to a 0-day threat. So where your IT department start deploying urgent patches is because they've become weaponized. Now, public aware is, as I mentioned, it's where the code to exploit has been published on the internet. Not just Internet Explorer has a vulnerability, it's specific part of Internet Explorer, the code, the actual language that you can run on a device, and it will become weaponized. So public aware does not necessarily mean that it's weaponized, but the distance between public aware and being weaponized can be sometimes very, very short. So we highlight public aware as one of the factors to urgently prioritize the patches. Countermeasures help us. Countermeasures are in two parts. You have a workaround. So maybe you don't have to deploy the patch if a countermeasure exists. Example for that update we just brought to you was a registry key. So maybe you could deploy a registry key instead of a patch, and you have a mitigation. So maybe you're mitigated by having a next generation antivirus, and that actually protects you, so you don't have to install the patch. Obviously, with a lot of you in a hugely distributed environment, now everyone is working from home. Throwing down big patches is a challenge, and we recognize it's a challenge, especially if you're using VPN solutions, etc. So countermeasures really can help, but you do need to know if the countermeasure must be removed after you patch. It's very, very important that you read the notes, and we put all of that into our product anyway to help. But if you don't have a product that can detail any of this, just go to our website. We'll show you in a second. You can put the CVEs into your tool set and prioritize the ones that we suggest. The last thing we can't help you with is your exposure. So how much of your environment is found to have a vulnerability that meets the very serious of the 5 factors we have before it. But we put that together, and we call that a 6 score, and that is how we are going to prioritize the Patch Tuesday patches. So let's take a look. And as usual, we don't put them into this webinar directly. We do want you to have access to them offline, whether you have a patch steering meeting or whether you need to research these separately in your own tool set. Again, regardless of your tool set, it's on our website. So if you go to syxsense.com/patch-tuesday, takes you directly there. I am just going to take you to the website here, and we're going to go through this together. So if you go to the syxsense.com website, along the top we have a news page that takes you directly to the Patch Tuesday holding page, and that's where we publish each and every month a Patch Tuesday write-up about what you should be prioritizing. But if you go to the news page, you'll find all of the other articles we've written related to patch management, both for Windows, Linux, third parties. And you'll see that there have been other vulnerabilities and announcements released. So this is a very useful place to come. If you have questions, of course, you can use the chat down in the corner. Or if you are new to patching and you'd like some help with a strategy, you can actually download them from the site. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Patch Tuesday right here. I'm going to read more. Now, if you don't want to come to this page each and every month, you don't need to. There is a subscription in the corner. You can pop in your details, click subscribe, and we'll send you an email each and every time we upload one of these articles. Now, as I mentioned, there have been 58 vulnerabilities fixed, which is a huge drop from what we've had throughout the month. But I was wondering, guys, do you want to take a stab at how many vulnerabilities have been fixed throughout the whole year? So what your gut feeling is?
400.
No, it's 1,250. So I don't know, it says over 1,200 vulnerabilities to date, but I think it's 1,250, just under, which is absolutely a huge amount of vulnerabilities fixed. I think until Microsoft address their feature update retirement properly, because they've been extending it, they obviously have more patches because of that extension. So a huge amount of vulnerabilities fixed. Luckily for us today, there are no weaponized and there are no public aware vulnerabilities for us to consider, which is a good thing. But what is surprising is there are no Internet Explorer updates. Now, this concerns me because we've always had Internet Explorer updates. So maybe they're not releasing the Internet Explorer fixes in the lead up to Christmas because everyone's using a browser to buy things and they don't want to disrupt users. Please keep an eye out for anything that is released from now until the end of the year, because over the last couple of years, we've had several out-of-band fixes in December, which obviously is the worst time to do it. But we've had This is just under half the number of fixes that was released in November, which was a record high. If you're using Windows 7 and Windows 2008, they are under extension rules. So as long as you have the extended support, you have 9 vulnerabilities which are important for each of those Windows 7 and 2008. Now I have picked a couple. So 17132 and 17142. These are Microsoft Exchange remote code execution vulnerabilities. They actually make up, I think there's 3 or 4 of these fixes altogether, but they have a CVSS score of 9.1, making this the highest and in the top 3 for the release this month. No countermeasure is available. What is important is if a hacker can take over a single mailbox, they can take over the entire Exchange server. So that's really, really urgent. That affects Exchange 2016 and 2019, and there is no workaround. The next one is 17158 on the website. It's for Microsoft Dynamics. Now this has the second highest CVSS score of 8.8, but exploitation is more likely. 2 things to note from the CVSS score is the attack complexity is low and the user interaction is none, which means it's not really difficult and you don't need an end user to click something to expose this. So it's really, really urgent, especially because this is more part of their more cloud platform. And lastly, the SharePoint. SharePoint, this is the 3rd vulnerability at 8.8. Exploitation is more likely and it affects everything going all the way back to SharePoint 2010 onwards. Now in a network-based attack, an attacker can gain access to create a site that could execute code remotely within the kernel of the device. With a total loss of integrity or a complete loss of protection, for example, the attacker is able to modify all and any file at will on that affected server. Now we have taken all of the vulnerabilities from the list and we've applied the six factors to it. Only 5, of course, because we don't know what your exposure looks like. And this is where we've put those together and we've put a recommended on the corner here. So all you need to do is to pop the CVE from here into your tool set and make sure that you are deploying that in whichever strategy you are using to do that. So we also have asked John and Pete to come up with their recommendations. So maybe John, you'd like to give me your first one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. CVE 2020 17140. This will be for Windows SMB information disclosure vulnerability. This has a CVSS score of 8.1, a Microsoft severity of just important. So that's a little interesting. Again, the vendor doesn't always correlate. Likelihood for exploitation, it has been exploited this year. Privilege is required is low and does not require any user interaction. So a little bit dangerous. The type of information that could be disclosed if an attacker successfully exploited this vulnerability is the contents of the kernel memory. An attacker could read the contents of kernel memory from a user mode process. Does the security update target the server or client side? And in this case, the fix targets both the server and client side. Specifically, the SMB2.srv binary that is the primary fix target, which is housed on both sides of that connection. In a network-based attack, the authenticated attacker would need to open a specific file with captured uplock lease, then perform repeated specific modifications to that file.
Awesome. I think we may have had one of those exploited already this year. Great choice. Thank you, John. Pete, what's yours?
Yeah, I'm pleased to announce that I beat John's 8.1 with an 8.5. Although I didn't beat your 8.9, but never mind. Yeah, so a patch or a CVE that I spotted was 17095. I'll just let you find that.
Oh yeah, you gave me the clue. 8.5 CV.
Oh well, there you go. Yeah, it's just a little game I play. Anyway, this is a vulnerability that we basically need to keep an eye on. It's a Hyper-V remote code execution vulnerability. In order to exploit this vulnerability, no user interaction is required and the privileges are low. This all contributes to a CVSS score of 8.5, which in their descriptive terms is high. It has a vendor severity of critical. So again, interesting in the same way that John's, the vendor severity and the CVSS don't quite line up. The vulnerability exists due to insufficient validation of a user-supplied input in Hyper-V. An attacker could run a specially crafted application on a Hyper-V guest that could cause the Hyper-V host operating system to execute arbitrary code, which it then fails to properly validate via a VSMB package data. This vulnerability can be remediated by deploying at least one of 5 possible KPs, depending on the operating systems in your estate. Many versions of Windows 10 and Windows Server operating systems are affected by this vulnerability.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Thank you. Great choices. As I mentioned, we've put all of the factors onto the site. You can download it anytime you like. And if you do need help with a strategy in whichever tool you're using, you can just download that from up on the top. Okay, so as we said, we would always bring to you issues that are registered or recorded by our own content team. We test every single patch before we upload it to our own product, and we do announce some of the issues we find here. These are not ones we've found ourselves, but we've just put them here for transparency. So if you are using Windows 7 or Windows 2008 R2, certain operations may fail on cluster shared volumes. This is a common issue that they put up. I don't know if it's real. All I can suggest is that you perform special testing on your test equipment before you apply these to live. For Windows 10, this one at the top was with us last month, which is the user certificates. What they're saying, Microsoft is saying, is that you need to make sure you have applied the latest SSU updates, as I've already recommended. And this is new, so the furigana characters may not be displayed properly with Microsoft Japanese input method editor. Microsoft is still working on a resolution. There are no fix to that. If we do see a fix, we'll put that up on our website if any of our customers are using that operating system language. So we have some Windows 10 Home and Pro information regarding the lifecycle for those feature updates. Maybe John, you'd like to take us through any of these that you've been researching?
Yeah, absolutely. 20H2 was released back in late October, and that currently has the longest support lifecycle for both consumer and business editions. However, the big change this month, nothing else has changed. Of course, this year has been filled with a bunch of extensions across all the different versions. 1903 did have a standardized end of life date, no matter if you're on business or on pro. It is now marked as end of life. Doesn't mean that you can't stop using it today. Of course, just means you can't get patched. You can continue to use it at your own risk, of course. Actually, after about a year and a half, it's only been around for that long. Again, end of life. Don't worry though. January's Patch Tuesday is actually where it's technically end of life now, but you won't receive updates next month. So it did receive updates this month, but it means no more. So if this, again, does still apply to you, you'll want to make sure that you roll out as soon as possible. Of course, it's extremely tough given that it's December and the holidays for most, so it might be a little bit difficult. If people are taking vacation, the machines aren't on. But again, you do have some time until you won't receive updates any longer, so make sure you prioritize. Just a little bit of background on 1903 as well. This was the first version to use the single semi-annual channel release, dissolving the targeted option, if you're familiar with pushing feature updates on a large scale. As well as the ability for administrators to choose the branch readiness level. So this is the first one that has been marked as essentially dissolved. This is also the first version to standardize that end of life date, as I'd mentioned, which we assume will now occur for every spring release, as it has also been the case with 2004, which was the next spring release after that. Regardless of consumer editions or as Home or Pro or business editions like Enterprise, they're going to have the same end of life date. If you're using Windows 10 Enterprise though, what I would recommend, be sure to prioritize the fall release versions of Windows 10 if your sole desire is to just simply extend the life of the OS that you're managing, because you'll get an extra year every time. As well as for business, on this slide, it's the same date. That's the point. Now every spring release is going to have that same end of life date, which will now typically fall on every December. No changes to any other version though.
It's very strange that this one actually came like a whole year and a half after, and it's already obsolete. That's brilliant. Thank you, John.
And then long-term versions, no change here. We had mentioned it on a previous call that the mainstream support did end for the original long-term service branch option, but you still got extended support. Of course, that's the point. That's why you pay a hefty price tag for that until 2025 for those long-term versions. No big change for Mac OS. Big Sur was released, which we had mentioned on a previous Patch Tuesday call. There has been, as mentioned earlier in this call, a small update to Big Sur 11.0.1. This is only for particular models of for Mac, if you've got the Apple M1 chip. So if you happen to be using a new model, you may want to go ahead and update. New model, apologies. New model, so it may apply, may not apply to you, but again, no major updates for Apple.
Oh, that's good.
And then for Linux, we've introduced Linux updates of the week. Here are just a few. Some do have a higher severity, so you definitely want to prioritize. These both happen to be for Red Hat. As we mentioned in the past as well, given that Linux, of course, has different vendors, they may not always agree and say the same thing. Code base could be very similar, but of course the vendor may say something different from the next. Vendors tend to be a little biased there. So you may not get the same exact vendor severity. It may say something entirely different. And of course, the standardized industry score may also not correlate. But you definitely want to prioritize these across not just the operating system updates, but also the different applications that you may have on your Linux devices.
Yep. And these are the ones we'll be actually releasing to our web page every single week. So on a Monday, you should see the Linux patches of the week, and they're the ones that have been released for the entire week previous.
And then Linux updates for the month. These definitely have a much higher severity. As you see right there at the very top, Ubuntu gave their update a medium and has the highest CVSS score possible. So definitely want to prioritize based on CVSS, but do take both severities into account. Definitely don't just take the vendor rating first. The CVSS can be much higher because it's going to standardize that vendor to the next. So it is very important to focus on both scores, knowing that the industry score is actually more normalized. Different, again, updates as well, not just for the OS itself per se, but also the applications. Oracle Enterprise Linux 8 there at the bottom has some Firefox updates as well. So there are some higher severity updates out there as well for applications. And AWS didn't make it into either, correct, Rob?
Yeah, that's correct. Last month and this month, AWS hasn't had a critical vulnerability fixed. That's really, really good for Amazon customers. Great. Okay, so there we have the end of the slide. Thank you very much for your help, gentlemen. Brian, do we have any questions? We have about a minute left. Maybe if there's any questions there, easy ones we can answer now. Otherwise, we can put them at the beginning of the next webinar.
Yeah, Rob, no worries. We've had a couple questions and they're great so far. I know we're short on time, but the first one is, why would the CVSS score be different on Microsoft's website and other websites online?
Okay, I can answer that because I know I've seen actually myself. Microsoft is an established vendor that is allowed to rank the vulnerability themselves. But there is an independent review after the fact. So they release their version of a CVSS score because they do release it at the time the patch hits their website. But then when it's independently reviewed afterwards, maybe within the first 24 hours, it can change. It can change, and not because Microsoft made a mistake, but just because the environment in which the patch exists can change, especially when you're looking at a vulnerability that relies on another application. So maybe an application that Microsoft doesn't have control over.
Awesome. Well, I believe we are out of time. We'll have to save any other questions for next month, but thank you guys so much. Rob, would you like to share any closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. It is the last webinar of the year. We've really enjoyed the last 6-7 months of running these. We really appreciate your feedback. We hope you have a fantastic December. We hope that this has helped you prioritize your patches for December, and we really look forward to seeing you here again in January. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.